very exciting. Welcome, everybody. Yeah, we're going to get started. Please find your seats. Welcome. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Native Sovereignty and Cultural Repair here at the Gerald Peters Contemporary here in Santa Fe. This is amazing. We're all here in Santa Fe. Who's come from other places that are not from Santa Fe? Show of hands. Many, many of you, including myself. Welcome, welcome, yes. My name is Shelly Spicer. I'm President and CEO of the Native Arts and Culture Foundation, and it's an honor to be in this space and on ancestral lands where Indigenous artistry and storytelling have flourished for generations. So to begin, it's my privilege to introduce someone whose words carry both beauty and history, Luci Tapahonso, inaugural Poet Laureate of the Dene Nation and Professor Emerita of English Literature at the University of New Mexico. Luci is an author of 6 award-winning books, including A Radiant Curve, Blue Horses Rush In, as well as 3 children's books. She's taught at the University of Kansas and the University of Arizona and shared her work on stages from Princeton and Harvard to the Tbilisi International Literature Festival and the University of New Zealand. Her many honors include the Helene Wurlitzer Residency, the Distinguished Literary Achievement Award from the Western Literature Association, and the Astana, Italy International Literary Prize, and including the Bosque Redondo Fellowship. So please join me in welcoming Luci Tapahonso.
Good afternoon. She Luci Tapahonso tashne. Todik ojen shledo todik eating bashichin. Dash cheatney dash che do kintle cheatney dash nala. Not anines that you see nasha. A good out net son shle. We gather, Creator Nikidiyin, we gather here in this beautiful space to listen to the collective wisdom of these accomplished and renowned women. We understand that their success has been wrought from years of academic rigor, and perhaps that was sometimes accompanied by temporary setbacks, misunderstandings, long hours of travel, missed family events, and hours of solitary study and creativity. This afternoon, we gather in gratitude for all aspects of sacredness, the air, the warmth of fire, bodies of water, plants, the land, and all animals and humankind. May we remember that holiness exists in the ordinary elements of our lives. We are grateful for a homeland that has always thrived on a glorious array of people and their diverse cultures, histories, and beliefs. We acknowledge the generosity of our Pueblo relatives in granting this land on which we learn, teach, celebrate accomplishments, and sometimes mourn losses. May we always cherish our ancestors as we prepare for the days ahead. May we remember that we exist because of their prayers and their faith. We are blessed with distinct and melodious tongues. Our languages are treasures of stories, songs, ceremonies, and memories. May each of us remember to share our stories with one another, because it is only through stories that we live full lives. May the words we speak go forth as bright beads of comfort, joy, humor, and inspiration. Today we reflect a rainbow of creation. Some of us came from the east, where bright crystals of creativity reside. They are the white streaks of early morning light when all is born again. Those who came from the south embody the strength of the blue mountains that encircle us. The Sangre de Cristos instill in us the vigorous spirit of youthful learning. Others came from the west. They are imbued with the quiet yellow glow of dusk. They help us achieve our goals. The ones from the north bring the deep restorative powers of night's darkness. Their presence renews us. The Jemez Mountains teach us that though the past may be fraught with sorrow, it was strengthened by the prayers of our forebears. We understand that we are surrounded by mountains still, and thus we are made of strength, zeal. We are strong ourselves. We are surrounded by mountains that help us negotiate our daily lives. May we always recognize the multitude of gifts that surround us. May our homes, schools, churches, and communities be filled with the wisdom and optimism that reflect a generous spirit. We are grateful for all blessings seen and unseen. May we fulfill the lives envisioned for us at our birth. May we realize that our actions affect all people and the earth. May we live in the way of beauty and help others in need. May we always remember that we are created as people who believe in one another. We are grateful, Nichidian, holy ones, for everyone that has gathered here, as they will strengthen our futures. All is beautiful again. Hajunahasli, 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 Hajunahasli.
Sure.
Thank you, Luci, for opening our time together with such power and grace. I'd like to take this time to thank our event host and sponsors, Gerald Peters Gallery, Evan Feldman, Gerald Peters, Angela Fines, and the Santa Fe Community Foundation, Diane Hamamoto, Christopher Gett, and Jane Myers. I'd also like to thank Amber Morningstar Byers and the entire Native Advised Fund, the Mellon Foundation, and the Ford Foundation. Your support makes conversations like this possible. And to the NACF staff and our board and our guests joining us today, we're so grateful for your presence and your commitment to our work. It's my pleasure now to hand the mic over to our moderator, Andrea Hanley. So she's our Director of Programming at NACF, and she'll be guiding us today through our conversation. So give it up for Andrea.
Thank you so much. Yat Todachi ears leg Klashi Mashashin Sisakani Dashache Tachini Dashanali Andrea Hanley and Shia Yat Shike Yat Shadane. I'm so happy to be here. My name is Andrea Hanley, and I'm a citizen of the Navajo Nation, if you haven't guessed that by now. I was raised in both Window Rock and Saline, Arizona, and I'm an arts administrator, and my 30-year career has been dedicated to the work of contemporary Native American artists in the Native American fine art field. I'm currently the director, as my boss said, of programs for the Native Arts and Cultures Foundation. Throughout my career, I've watched the NACF empower Native arts and the creative community. Its demonstrated history of championing Native artists and creatives is so important and remarkable. The work drives NACF's mission, impacts social change, and supports the transformation of communities into dynamic, beautiful, and resilient places. How does Native artists creatives make us think and act. It's through their transformative work and art that we speak all languages. Thank you again, Luci, for doing that for me, my Shemayeza. Thank you for a beautiful, beautiful talk. Our panel is going to dive into Indigenous narrative sovereignty, focusing on cultural memory and repair through creativity and production. Focusing together, we're exploring what we face in the current political climate and how we collectively design systems of support. Native sovereignty refers to the right of people to control and shape their narratives and representations about themselves, their culture, and their history. It's about having the power to define our stories rather than having them defined by external forces. When we're talking about narrative sovereignty, let's open up the discussion by talking about what native sovereignty is, especially within the context of Indigenous art and storytelling, and what the implications of its infringement have been and could be. I'd like to introduce our panelists, Candice Hopkins, who is Carcross Tagish First Nation. Candice lives in Red Hook, New York. She is the executive director and chief curator of the Forge Project. Her writing and curatorial practice explores the intersections of history, contemporary art, and indigeneity. She is a fellow at the Indigenous Art History and Curatorial Studies at Baird College. She is a curator of exhibitions including Indian theater, Native performance, art, and self-determination since 1969 at the Hessel Museum of Art, and the touring exhibition Soundings, an exhibition in 5 parts, co-curated by Dylan Robinson and Double Vision. She was a senior curator for the inaugural 2019 and 2022 editions of the Toronto Biennial of Art, and part of the curatorial team of the Canadian Pavilion at the 58th Venice Biennale, featuring the works of media collective Isama, as well as Documenta 14, Athens and Castle, Sakakan, an international called International Indigenous Art at the National Gallery in Canada, in Ottawa. I'd also like to introduce Shelly Lowe, new to Santa Fe. She is the new president, yes, she is the new president of the Institute of American Indian Arts and the former chairperson of the National Endowment for the Humanities. She's a citizen of the Navajo Nation. She grew up at Navajo in Ganado, Arizona. Under the Biden-Harris administration, she served as the chair of the National Endowment of the Humanities. Her career in higher education has included administrative roles as the executive director of the Harvard University Native American Program, assistant dean in the Yale College Dean's Office, and the director of the Native American Cultural Center at Yale University. Prior to these positions, she was the graduate education program facilitator for the American Indian Studies program at the University of Arizona. Ms. Lowe has also served as a member on the University of Arizona Alumni Association governing board, a member of the board member of the National Indian Education Association, and a member of the National Council on the Humanities, which is an appointment she received from President Obama. Cara Romero is a contemporary fine art photographer, activist, and a member of the Chemehuevi Indian tribe of the Chemehuevi Reservation, which is a branch of the Southern Paiute on the Mojave Desert in California. Romero's identity informs her photography, a blend of fine art and editorial photography shaped by years of study and visceral approach to representing Indigenous and non-Indigenous cultural memory, cultural history, and lived experiences from a Native American female perspective. She takes on the role of storyteller using contemporary photography techniques to depict the modernity of Native peoples, illustrating Indigenous worldviews and aspects of supernaturalism in everyday life. She studied cultural anthropology at the University of Houston, but was disillusioned with the portrayal of Native Americans in the past tense. At that point, Cara decided that making photos of contemporary Native presence could do more than anthropology could do in words. She studied photography and photojournalism at the Institute of American Indian Arts and Oklahoma State University. She's been featured in PBS's Craft in America, and her award-winning work is included in many important exhibitions and in public and private collections internationally. On top of that, Cara is a 2017 Native Arts and Cultures Foundation Mentor Artist Fellow. And then we get to our wonderful Daisy Quezada Ureña, who is Mexican-American. She's an artist and the Institute of American Indian Arts academic dean. Daisy is a multidisciplinary artist, faculty, and dean at the academic affairs at the Institute. Within her practice, she creates ceramic works, installations, and artist books that thematically connect to ideas around the identity and place in relation to social structures that cross imposed borders. As a Mexican-American artist, she is informed by her cultural background, bridging the personal to the social, forming a relationship to immigration, gender inequality, labor, and class issues. More recently, Daisy has been included and selected for the 12th CITES Santa Fe International. She also was included in the 25th Biennale of Sydney in 2025 and 2026, both very, very exciting exhibitions. She was also recognized as a United States Latinx Forum Artist Fellow. So I'm going to get straight into our questions. And welcome to all of you folks. It's a very, very, very powerful board, or panel that I'm sitting up here with. It's also a very Najoni panel as well. So we're going to talk a little bit about this, and I'm going to go into kind of sort of particular questions for you. If you have things that you want to kind of talk in with these, then feel free, and then we'll kind of go into more of a detailed kind of dialogue with all of you. But we want to start out with a couple of questions just specifically for you. So I'm going to start with you, Cara. Your artist, again, as we talked about, sits at the intersection of intervening in harmful and reductive representations of Indigenous people, saying that the rest of America has no grasp of really who we are, and replacing and mending those inaccurate portrayals in academia and media, but portraits and series you create. Can you share what started you on the focus of that journey in your practice?
Thank you for that question, and it's an honor to be here, and I would be more nervous if there weren't so many friendly faces in the audience.
I know.
And for that beautiful opening, Luci, thank you. I didn't have a ton of reference when I started out, and feel really fortunate to have come to the Institute of American Indian Arts. Without having attended tribal college, I don't think I would have understood as much about Native art history. I don't think I could have gotten that anywhere else. It was important to be able to understand what our critical dialogue is and how we had been portrayed by ethnographic photographers and people that had privilege to hold the medium of our storytelling for a very long time. And there were very important people from our community that came before and really showed what was possible, whether it was sense of humor or authenticity about lived experience, the beauty in our own communities. I think I was really hungry for more. And then began the formal training on the technical side of things. For photography, it was kind of a point in life where I felt very much like an outsider, not only to the art world, but maybe even to my own art making community. Photography was not a traditional art. It didn't have categories at SWAIA that described, what I was trying to do. Digital had arrived, but yet we were consuming photography in this kind of universal language and didn't have control over our own storytelling. It was a very expensive medium. And I remember thinking often, what am I doing with my life? Why couldn't I have picked painting or ceramics? And I think that's probably, I still look back at those decisions as being critical because that's probably the number one reason why kids from, below median income do quit the medium of photography and filmmaking. But it's also one of the most burgeoning categories of our art now. And I'm very thankful that I never deviated from a path that didn't make sense at the time, and began to find my voice. And that's an interesting journey for each artist. I think we begin with looking what's out there And I can remember my very early photographs maybe emulating Curtis, or, it was black and white film, but we were brown toning, we were sepia toning, we were making figurative landscapes devoid of modern context. And that's a lot to unpack for a young Native person. I think I was 21 when I was here making, and it's beautiful work, and Curtis's work is beautiful, and it's really a connection to the past, but it's not authentic. And it wasn't authentic to my experience. And so I think there are moments as artists where we have many existential crises. And for me, pushing through those and really thinking about our young people and my own lived experience to be able to make portraiture that really leans into the juxtaposition of what it's like to be a Native person in contemporary context. And are we as good as our ancestors? And how does our indigeneity pop up in contemporary culture? And whether it's right or wrong, or we're critical of ourselves or our communities, what is the truth? And so that has really been something that I'm continue to be passionate about, and to have the privilege to collaborate in community.
That's great. Any comments? Well, then I'm going to go straight on to Candice. Candice, your work and practice spans several geographies, from curatorial, scholarly writing, teaching, and as a chief curator and the executive director of the Forge Project, can you share how the initiatives you've undertaken at Forge support Native artistic self-determination and why that matters?
Great question, Andrea. So first of all, because I don't know if everyone in the room knows what Forge is, because we're a pretty new organization. Forge began in 2021. It was the initiative of two co-founders, Becky Gotchman and Zach Foyer, who were both inspired by the radical resistance movement that sparked during Black Lives Matter, but also the resurgence of Red Power at that time, especially in Albuquerque, where I was living. I was witnessing it. Me and my husband were witnessing it almost on a daily basis. And it gave me a different hope for the future. And so I would say that the organization emerged during that moment. It is a social justice oriented organization. We are Native-led. We are, let's say, Native determined, if that's another word. A number of our staff members are here. We have recently transitioned about 2 years ago from a private organization into a nonprofit. And me coming from the curatorial field, and many of our staff members also coming from the curatorial field, I keep looking at Sarah's in the audience, Sarah Viscaradilli. I kind of think of Forge also as a curatorial project. And so with that in mind, we can think of Indigenous governance perhaps also as a creative project.
It's like social practice or social engagement in a sense.
Exactly. So what we did in that year-long process that we took to transition to be a nonprofit is we thought about all of the problems that we see in the museum world, in the nonprofit world, in the so-called nonprofit industrial complex. And we thought we have a rare opportunity to not only do something different, but to do something that reflects our own values. And so we found those values in our protocols and our charters and our governance system. We have an Indigenous Steering Council that sits above our board. That's a 7-member council that includes luminaries like Jolene Rickard, who's here in the audience. It includes G. Peter Jemison, it includes Jeffrey Gibson, it includes Sky Hopinka, it includes Monique Tyndall, who's really led us also through this process. It includes Jasmine Niosh. And the reason that we did that, and just to break it down for everyone, is because one, We were a little afraid if we immediately became a nonprofit and started building a board that it would replicate the power structures that are everything wrong with this world right now. Trump 2.0 is settler colonialism on steroids. We don't want that in our organization at all. We don't want extractive colonialism. We don't want Native performativity. We don't want to perform for non-Native audiences. We want to create our own autonomous zone, let's say, that is Forge Project, that is really important right now because we don't want Forge to feel like it's part of the United States. And I say that in all seriousness. And I think that it's time to invest again in Native models of leadership like we've always had. Mm-hmm. And we need those in our nonprofit organizations, we need those in our universities, we need those in all aspects of our lives. So that's why we structured Forge the way we structure it. Mm-hmm. We have 5 different programs. We do an amazing fellowship that I encourage people to apply for. Tomorrow morning, starting at 8:30, we are giving away 1,000 breakfast burritos as part of the 2025 Great Burrito Giveaway to all the vendors at SWAIA. So we give because that's our kin relation. That's how we show respect. We try to think of ways that we can interrupt extractive models that we live within, and we understand that we live in capitalism. But what can we do to put out new models of leadership, to support culture broadly, not just art, because culture is at the heart of our communities, as Luci so beautifully shared her words this morning, and they're also our health, and they're also our resistance.
Lovely. Shelly, I'm going to ask you a question. As a chairperson of the National Endowment for the Humanities, how were the initiatives you architect that were specific to Native communities supported or perhaps stymied? With your departure under the current administration, what concerns do you have regarding Native storytelling and agency being supported?
Thank you so much for that question, and thank you for that explanation. I'm excited about Forge, and I want to go get a burrito. We'll see. I don't know if I have time.
Do you have a booth?
I don't have a booth. Maybe. Talk to me again later. Well, thank you, everybody, first for coming here today and for hearing this conversation, because I hope that when you walk away from this lively conversation, what we're sharing in our insights, you're going to understand that there's so much work that we have to do, and it's an important time that we think about artists and humanitarian people now, because their work is so essential as we move forward. Forge is just an example of that. But I also want to acknowledge all my IIA faculty, staff, students, alumni for being here today as well. And of course, Patsy at the museum for being here. So, I have to credit back to Native Arts and Cultures Foundation for some of the background that I was able to bring into the National Endowment for Humanities. So if you're not familiar with the National Endowment for Humanities, it is the federal funding organization that provides grants funding to humanities projects across the country. I keep saying we, I guess I gotta let that go. It is the sister agency for the National Endowment for the Arts. And the way that you tell the difference between the two, NEA, National Endowment for the Arts, funds the creation of art. NEH, National Endowment for Humanities, will fund the study of that art, but not the creation of that art. So that's one way to kind of keep them separate. But NEA, NEH, and NACF had gotten together and jointly hosted a convening in February of 2020 to talk to cultural bearers, to language bearers, to artists about what the environment and atmosphere was for them within federal funding. Because it was very clear, I had been on the council for NEH, that federal funding was not coming into Native communities and Native organizations. And there was just not an equal amount, or we were underserving Native artists, right? And what did we need to be thinking about, both as federal agencies, but as artists and as foundations and organizations that work with them, on how we move this forward? How do we do a better job? So it was a really great conversation. And then, of course, you know what happened. COVID happened, and everything kind of shut down and everything kind of stalled. But, one thing to think about, and I say this, and I have a colleague who said this all the time, right? Elections have consequences. So we had a new election, we had a new administration, and that new administration took great steps to put Native people into some major positions. Now, I was extremely hesitant about even thinking about the chair position when I was asked about it, but we had just seen Secretary Holland be put in and confirmed as Secretary of the Interior for the first time ever, and I cried so hard that day. And I said, if there's gonna be a way for us to shift things and to do this work, guess what, I could work with her, and that would be exciting. So I said, okay, let's think about this. But I came thinking about the conversations of that convening and the continually asking, where's the funding going to Native organizations? Why aren't Native organizations applying? And when they do apply, why aren't they successful in getting federal grants? And I let the staff know that if I'm coming into this position, this is going to be a priority for me because it always has been a priority, and we need to think about it. So the nice thing about coming in was Secretary Holland took the reins and she announced the Federal Indian Boarding School Initiative. And that kind of sealed the path for NEH to be saying, we are working with Native communities, because every federal agency, we know trust responsibility, right? We know that every federal agency needs to be thinking about their relationships with tribal communities. We were able to say, this is a priority now, and we all need to be paying attention. So everybody started to get on board, and we started to have, much larger conversations about what does it mean to talk about where Native people are today, how they're represented, what kind of governments they can have, how they can run their own organizations, and how do we as specific agencies in the work that we do support this. So I was able to get the staff on board, I was able to get our council on board, and I have to always acknowledge the council is my council is 26 members, or NEH's council is 26 members from individuals from across the United States appointed by the president. And a number of them came up to me after the announcement of the Federal Indian Boarding School Initiative and our work with it and said, I didn't even know this history. They had never, ever been introduced to that history. And these were people who were national leaders in the humanities. And I just thought, we have got so much work to do. So we developed an Office of Native and Indigenous Affairs, right? And I had the opportunity to be under an administration that appointed Deb Hallen, that appointed Ellen Malerba as treasurer. She's Mohegan tribal nation, one of their traditional leaders, and other individuals across the administration who are Native people who could come in and say, if we're doing our consultations because we're required to, why don't we have an actual office that runs this and makes sure that we're doing things appropriately? So the Treasury Department created an office. We started working off of their model to create an office that NEA started to create an office, right? Because these things were important to embed into these agencies and departments and make sure that things would move forward. And of course, like I said, elections have consequences. And we know that a lot of that has shifted and changed, and those offices have, for the most part, all been eliminated and are gone. The work that we were trying to do with tribal communities, some of the specific work, specifically with the boarding school initiative and some language work we were doing, that's been pulled back because funding has been pulled back. And I think what's important to note is that we can't be negative about it. We can't think, oh my God, this is going to change, because things are going to shift at all opportunities. The one thing I learned is that the administration has priorities. An agency like NEH falls under the executive office, has to kind of really follow what the administration wants to do. But we also have the other branches of government. And the other branches of government actually are very aware of tribal sovereignty. They're aware of the responsibility of the federal government. We have congressional leaders, House representatives who say they know, because this is their communities, these are their states, their populations. They know this work that has to keep going. And we need to remember that they are on our side, and we need to be encouraging them, and we need to be telling them that this needs to keep going. I'm the type of person that says it's going to be a couple years, it's going to be rough, but we're going to get to the other side. But we have to make sure that we're all on the same page and we're working together to get to that other side. And we're continuing to pull people in with us. When I said that council members didn't know the history, there are a lot of people in this country that still don't know the history of Native people, still don't know that we are contemporary people living in this world, that we have contemporary cultures, that our creation stories lead us and create our governments and the ways that we do things, right? The ways that we do things in a good way. And when they learn, they're surprised usually, I find. Sometimes they're a little shocked that they didn't know it. Sometimes they're a little defensive, right? We know that. But it's our job, and it's our artists, and it's our language and cultural bearers who are capturing what's happening today. And they're going to put it in photographs. They're going to put it in paintings. They're going to put it in sculptures. And they're going to capture this moment in time, and we're going to be able to look back at that and say, okay, what have we learned from that? And how do we kind of think about it in terms of where we're going to go into the future, right? So it is so important that we support our artists, that we support those people who share our culture and our languages. And it is even more important that we start to educate other people and get a little bit louder maybe, right, about it, and make sure they're paying attention. It's gonna be rough, but we can do it.
Yay. Any comments, viewers? Do you have any comments for Shelly? Please.
I would just say that you give me so much hope.
So do you. With burritos?
I was going to say, Shelly, I remember the conversation we had, about some of the things that were happening right now, and you had said it's interesting because a lot of these things have consistently happened to Native people, pulling funding or us trying to figure out ways to get back in and lobbying and people going to Washington, D.C. and testifying and doing all these things that our parents did and our grandparents did to make sure that we ensured and getting around and figuring out how to make that work. And a lot of times, and now it's happening to everybody, where it's always happened to Native people.
And they're surprised. And I'm like, this has always happened to Native people. Now you know how it feels.
I'm going to ask Daisy a question for you, unless you had something else to do. Okay, great. Well, Daisy, when we talk about narrative sovereignty and agency and representation, cultural mending and repair, and what that means, we can't ignore how borders have been affected and effected cultural production. If we look at ideas around transmotion, how do you view the work you do in questioning imposed and imaginary borders, the function as mechanisms towards cultural repair and sovereignty?
Thank you, Andrea. And Shelly, I am just delighted to be with you. I can't believe that this is here. But yeah, it's an interesting thing. Oh, sorry, I know I need to speak up, so I will just do that. Borders have been a part of my life. Since I was born, it's something that has been an impact to my family significantly, the control, the erasure, the violence that comes with it. And I think it's inherent in how it is that I operate and exist as an artist, and how it is that I also think about engaging and working with individuals that I have relationships and I care deeply about and I'm committed to fully in everything that I try and do and model and represent myself in. But I think that what I try and do, at least, is in sharing stories is what's been modeled in my family. Like, that's how we grew up, is stories like my grandpa talking about the different things that he was experiencing, like what it was like to be separated, like if he was like here in the country, like working through the Bracero program, and then to send money back south to the border so people could like have something to eat or have a house to build. And then in that, being able to have like permissions because of this government to come into this country to exist and operate and be recognized as human beings, but then at some points like being seen as no longer being human and being removed in some senses, I think is everything that comes across in my art. It's those stories, it's the fun humor, it's the like late nights of like talking and having great food and good dances and laughter. Everything that I am and everything that is emanated in my arts practices, I think is that. I think about my current exhibition. That is very much a building of different narratives and conversations and histories of people in this area, and how it is that comes forward, because we tend to silo ourselves out. I think different peoples and different cultures sometimes forget that there is a relation that happens. There is a crossover in history, and that's one thing that I was trying to do in that is even in institutions is bringing those institutions and different cultures and organizations together to have a sort of cohesive conversation and narrative about the thing that we're all moving for and moving towards, because sometimes that's difficult. I think when we're working in a specific institution or we're working in a specific organization, we tend to just focus on that because we have to commit. But I think fostering those stronger relationships is the way that we build through that a little bit more. I think that's done through objects, that's done through stories, and that's done through engagements. There's a lot of, I enjoy cooking when I still can. I love doing that for people, just to sit down so we can get to know each other, because sometimes we forget. We're operating in just this very linear way, and there's this sort of intent of wanting to just gather and draw in, but I think sometimes we forget of what it means to share and exchange, and to be sincere and honest with folks, because we're so used to being protective of one another. There's this fear sometimes that happens. That's a lot of what I think about. So I hope that my practice and my work, it's creating a space for that. It's creating some sort of mending. It's creating some sort of relationship in how it is that it's operating and thinking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Any comments from any of you? It's really interesting. I see so many bits and pieces of all of you in these conversations that we're having. I connect so much in the way that you think, very linear, and the ways that you understand leadership and agency and what it means to be an Indigenous person, an Indigenous woman, and the way that you use that power, I think, is so smart, and the way that I think about all four of you. But Cara, you had something to say.
I think a lot about cultural transmission, and even what you were talking about with the Forge, and about moving around administrations, and our culture is like water, and it's not a stagnant place and time. It's a river, and it's moving around boulders and obstacles, and it's many things together moving through time. And I think when we talk about cultural repair and cultural healing, to me it always comes back to being a young person in community. And we see it on the micro level when we're at home. How do we transmit culture and all of the things that came before us when we're stuck on these reservations now, or we're in an urban setting, or we're governing off a 1934 IRA Constitution, or we're trying to support artists through nonprofit practices, or we're divvying up between contemporary and traditional. And I think it's all coming back to us just being artists and creatives and problem solving about, not just transmitting ideas, but cultural transmission. How do we bring all the things that come from the people before us that, manifest in us as individuals? We're all so different. Our art practices are different, our creativity is different, but we have to figure out a way to revitalize, to preserve, to fight for all of the things that our parents and our grandparents fought for and endured. And you're right, we've always been able to do it. We've always been in active, loud, passive resistance. We've always figured out a way to resist. And so that, I think, also, being on this panel and listening to all of you gives me hope.
your words are inspiring to me, Cara, because it made me think of the relationship between cultural transmission and resistance, as you just said. We've been talking a lot at Forge and with Friends of Forge in the last couple of days about how this moment is going to create a lot of harm. It has already. And how do we find not just strength and community at that in this moment, but also how do we support our leaders who are the spokespeople at this moment, which you really are putting yourself out there in a time when Native sovereignty, not just narrative sovereignty, is under attack. So, but I think that we've always had those skills in our communities, and sometimes it means, my people are a potlatch people. I'm Tlingit, and there was a potlatch ban in Canada, in northern Canada, for 63 years. But that didn't mean that the potlatches went away. So potlatches are our governance system. They're the way we celebrate birth. They're the way we celebrate marriage. They're the way we pay back debt. They were the way that we avoided warfare. They are the way that we let another person in a community know that they're out of line and repair those relationships. They were a separate form of governance. They were a separate form of economy, and I say were there because they don't function with the same strength that they used to. But they didn't die because we disguised them. And that in those disguises actually were their strengths. So sometimes when potlatches went underground, especially in the 1920s, when we were jailed for them or fined for them, and all of our regalia and masks were confiscated and actually went to the George Gustave Hay collection that became NMAI, and also the Royal Ontario Museum and the British Royal Museum in Victoria. The way that we did that was we disguised it in some cases as charitable giving during Christmas. Because then the Indian agents, which were like spies in our communities, couldn't say that that was actually a potlatch because we said it was Christmas. And we said, don't you give gifts at Christmas? Don't you give 1,000, or it was actually 1,500 sacks of flour, which was very clearly a potlatch. Don't you give that much flour at Christmas? Isn't that charitable giving? So just to say that I think that we have this in our toolkits right now, and that is our sovereignty. We just need to lean into it.
I think that's great, and it leads me right into my next question, and it's just digging a little bit deeper into what you guys are starting to talk a little bit right now. And you look at individual artist practices like Daisy and Cara, or practices in cultural workers, folks like you, Shelly and Candice. What role do you view working with community plays, our passive resistance, and how do we engage more meaningfully? And you started kind of pulling those things out, but I'd love it if we could talk about that, both working with Native communities and non. And you've all gone and said a lot of really interesting and wonderful things already, and have given us wonderful examples, but maybe we can just touch on it a little bit more, dig a little bit more on that. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I can start. So one of the first questions that kind of came into my mind when I started NEH is, well, one, why didn't we have more Native applicants? And two, why weren't we funding more Native applicants? But the next part was, why weren't Native organizations applying? And there was clearly a barrier issue, right? A barrier issue that nobody had thought to discuss or kind of delve into. And I think that that's one of the things that working with communities is so important. It's because you need to know what are those barriers that you have put up that you weren't even aware of. If you're not talking to the community, and the community can say fairly quickly and easily, that is a barrier for us. We cannot apply to that because this application requires this, or that, or any other barrier that might come forward in how a local community or Native organization, a Native artist or researcher might be able to access what you think is a great resource for them. So having those conversations and being able to really pinpoint with communities, what are the barriers for you accessing these resources and being able to do the work that you're going to do? You know, the MacArthur Foundation is starting a new program to support self-determination in tribal communities.
And one of the reasons they're doing this is because they spent 2 years listening to communities, going in and having conversations to say, what is it that we are doing that you understand? What is it that you need that we can understand better? And how do we move forward in all of this? And it was about creating good relationships. When I would travel around, we have state and jurisdictional, NEH has state and jurisdictional humanities councils that do the same work, but at the very local state level. The local communities know where their funding comes from when they do get funding, but the national scene doesn't know that, right? There's this disconnect. I didn't know all of those small organizations that they were receiving funding from, but once I got a better sense of it, then I could have a better picture of saying, okay, there's this project here, this is how we can kind of manifest it, this is who you can reach out to, this is how you can start to make connections. But it wasn't, you have to ask, you have to actually be there, you have to sit down, you have to listen, and you have to say, okay, let's get creative about a few things. And so for just one instance or example, NEH has fellowships for faculty at tribal colleges and universities, and they got very, very few applications. Well, tribal college faculty can't take a year off. They teach their classes, sometimes 5 and 5. They don't have anybody else to come in and teach the classes. So NEH had to think, okay, what can we do to facilitate being able to offer this funding to faculty? And one of the ways that we were able to do it is there's a pocket called Chair's Grants. They probably don't exist anymore. But the chair got to decide, up to $30,000, could we fund this certain project or this ask? And we allowed tribal colleges to tell us up to $30,000, could we pay an adjunct for you? And they did. And so if you were a faculty member at TCU, got a fellowship from us, we automatically said, okay, please send us this application so we can give you money to pay for that adjunct faculty member. So that person could do the work, right? But it was a conversation that you'd think could have happened years ago. But, it's timing, it's making those relationships, understanding the barriers, and being creative about getting around those barriers.
Where are you going to go? Okay. I wanted to share one example of something we've done at Forge, which I think it could be a good model, and I know happens from time to time, but it was a year, actually more than a year-long process that my colleague Sarah Briscara-Dilly led with Monique Tyndall, who is the Director of Cultural Affairs at Stockbridge-Munsee Community. Sarah is Director of Indigenous Relationality at Forge. And that was the drafting of a 3-year memorandum of understanding that was ratified by Tribal Council. Because Forge is a Native-led organization, but we are on Mohicanuk land. We are on Mohican land. We are not Mohican. We are uninvited guests on their land, even though we are a Native organization. So what is our responsibility? How do we pay the debts of being on their land that is witness to legacies of removal? Mohican folks were removed 7, arguably 8 times from the Hudson Valley, where we are now, the Mohicanuk Valley, all the way to Wisconsin, but also other communities as well. So how do we attend to legacies of removal at a Native organization? And with the MOU that Sarah and Monique led, one of Monique's first questions, and I hope she doesn't mind if I quote her, was, well, how is it going to benefit us? How is it going to benefit my community and our needs, of which there are many? Tribal museums, tribal archives are radically underfunded. There's a lot of need. There's often no resources for repatriation. So you have a museum, but then you don't have funding to even, bring back your ancestral belongings. But I would say that, one of my critiques with often non-Native organizations or museums working with Native communities, one, it can sometimes be a one-time thing, or it's with an individual. Mm-hmm. It's not necessarily with a community. But often it's also just for a single, let's say, social practice project or something like that, and then they move on to another community. Mm-hmm. So, but I think that indebtedness of relation needs to be actually part of your organization's structure, and that's what we're trying to do at Forge. I'm not saying that it's perfect, but it's one way of moving forward, and it's moving forward on a diplomatic level, in the level of diplomatic relations and the level of governance, not government, but governance, which I think more of us need to think about and do.
And that's an example of cultural repair, which is what we're talking about right now. So that's fantastic, Candice. Thanks for bringing that up. Cara, did you want to say something?
I think one of the things that you said sparked just experience, and you were saying how the teachers didn't have the time to take off. And I think this concept of time and Indigenous time and cultural transmission in our communities, that's the paucity, right? Mm-hmm. I know that from my community, our ceremonies get shorter. I know that instead of 4 days, it's 1 day. I know that it's harder to uphold responsibility and obligation to travel to other places because of time. I know that it's hard to get away from Santa Fe when the basket materials are ready. There's like a week and you got to go and you got to gather, and so I think as artists and as Native people, we're thinking about time, and I do think that the fellowships and the grants to artists and for humanities are such an important place to put money, because it's providing time for people to interact with each other, to maybe go back to a different concept of time, because capitalist time is really fast, and there's no stopping, and it's like this anxiety-driven concept of time where, everything is attached to every hour, and so I do think on the other side of that, and I do, have experience in both sides of nonprofit and philanthropy, is the importance of honoring Indigenous sovereignty and letting go of power and control, and allowing people to be and to learn and to act in their own ways, whether it's like forgiving a reporting requirement, because that can be insanely difficult when you're trying to just get a grant to make baskets in community or whatever it is. And so I do know that NACF and Forge are, providing really important fellowships for people to activate in community in a good way, and they provide a really good model for other organizations to let go of the power and control, to trust in ways of knowing and ways of being, and providing time.
I absolutely agree. And it's one thing, Shelly, when you're talking about the time of tribal college faculty, and that when I was doing a lot more of my work in residency, that's what we found with Native artists, is that you had non-Native artists who were able to take those 2 weeks off, or a month off, or maybe a year off. If you're a Native artist, you have your full-time job, you have your studio in your kitchen, you've got your kids, you've got your mom and dad. You don't have even 2 weeks. Maybe you have 10 days. You know what I mean? And that's a lot. That's a lot of an issue too, in terms of time and what that means for artists, and the time that they need to really be able to create and to think and to process and practice in a way that I think is incredibly thoughtful. And that is something I think is incredibly important that we're bringing up today, is time. So.
Yeah, no, I think time is important. I think that's also important is the sense of accountability that we have to the spaces that we're operating in. 2 weeks ago, I was talking to a local artist here in town who was struggling because the city decided that they weren't going to fund their arts organization that was bringing resources to the south end of town, and that was heartbreaking, right? And I think that there are organizations and individuals that do that really well, or have set the model for that too. I also think of Laura Evans, who's at the very end. She did extraordinary work at II, founding our artist in residency program, and that's still going. Dr. Mary, yes, thank you. Yeah. I also think of Dr. Mary Deliri and the work that she's doing extensively. She's going to be on a panel at MOCNA, and I think all of these individuals have these sort of same things and values that align, that are guiding and creating these resources and platforms, and they're they're showing up in ways that are needed. They're present in the ways that we all want and admire and see. So, that's a lot of what I think about.
I'll just be brief, but following, Daisy, what you're saying, and also your legacy, Laura, at starting these amazing residencies, too, at IAI with folks like James Luna and, all kinds of incredible artists who then could meet with students, because I think sometimes we don't always have access to mentors that we would like to learn from. But a couple of things that we do at Forge through the fellowship is, one, it's an unrestricted cash award, which means we don't direct. If you need that money to give to your sister to buy a house, that's your jurisdiction. We also invite people to come and stay for up to 3 weeks, but not everyone can, and not everyone can even come at all. It's their invitation, but when they come, we host them well. We feed them homemade meals. They're not expected to produce anything unless they want to. And it's not just artists, it's people who work in language, it's people who work in food sovereignty, it's people who work in mental health, let's say, cultural leaders broadly, because I think we need that support too. I actually think there's lots of artist residencies, but there's very few residencies if you're a PhD student who's working in trauma-informed psychiatry, and you just need some time to figure out how to write a dissertation and develop a practice that's going to stop the cycles of colonial violence. That's a pretty important thing to do, but there's no residencies for that. So we did support Raina Perlsold when Raina was completing their PhD. And then the other thing is when folks need to bring their family, we support that. And we find ways to do that. Sometimes it's your parents, sometimes it's your baby, sometimes it's your sister and brother, sometimes it's your whole family because you want to see every single baseball game you can in a 5-day period. And one fellow did that, Sterling. So, I think that I've always had these flexible systems, but sometimes when we adopt existing ones, we lose that flexibility and that's not aligned with our protocols. So.
That kind of gets me into my next question, and you've all kind of started talking about this now, is like, what is the precarity do you see or worry will transpire for artists working in this current political landscape? I just ask, what precarity do you see or worry will transpire for artists working in this current political landscape? And you guys have started talking about this, and I think about it. I just move in a little bit further. You're all living it.
Well, I think the first thing, like my knee-jerk reaction is we're having to redact language that we've, in my life, come to be able to articulate so beautifully on behalf of people that came before us. Right. And be able to express our lived experience and our history. And I think being a maker, I'm feeling a little sense of, redact all the museum labels that you need to and just Trojan horse it in there. Let the art do the healing. Let the art speak for itself. And it's a tragedy to have to be careful around language that, we've worked so hard to acquire and to impart to younger people that, help them understand their own experience, And so I think that for me is not just scary. I mean, it's happening. Yeah. People are scrubbing websites and, I know that everybody here is, looking at whatever dumb words show up on the list, they're not dumb. They're really, really important. And that to me is terrifying, And so when I think about resistance, I think about the visual language and the importance of how we're going to work around that visually. And I think that that's one thing that we're going to have to continue to figure out.
I agree, and I think one of the things that we want to be very cautious of and ensure that we're supporting artists and encouraging them in their work is, for a very long time, Native art was made not for Native people, right? It was made for non-Natives, and it was made in a style, in a way that non-Native people wanted that art to be. And we have gotten so great about doing art for us and telling our stories the way that we need to tell it, whether that's funny, whether that's in your face, whether that makes people mad, right? We need to ensure that our artists don't feel like they have to go back to making art for other people and not for us. We need to encourage them to continue to make art for us in the ways that we need it to be made.
Great. Sharing.
I'll go ahead. Okay. Yeah, I think absolutely the censorship, the erasure of people. When I think about this, I immediately think of Berta Cáceres and the activist work that she was doing, and the fact that she was erased from history because of everything that she was spearing. So that is a concern, right? Is the removal of people from this world because they're advocating and speaking out for other things, and then other individuals who are pushing back against that more informally. I think of Bad Bunny, and he's like, fuck the US, we're not coming here. I'm gonna throw my concerts everywhere. And also his other music that's coming in, that's critiquing, that's just acknowledging maybe what our current president is trying to do. I think it's interesting. And he's reaching that popular culture, and he's making them aware. So that's what I think about it.
I have 2 points. I'd say one, following Daisy, what you're sharing in a moment when people are literally being disappeared off the streets. We also need to think of what we can do to create networks for protection, number one, but at a time also when the southern border is getting even more hardened, those are our relations. And we can't forget that. We actually need to foreground it at this time, because what this administration is doing is creating a scarcity complex, and that scarcity complex fractures our relations, our communities. But we, as Native nations, have always come from a place of abundance. And I think that we need to remember that, because the scarcity is going to create a lot of fighting, and that's by design. And I think we need to do the opposite.
I did a project a few years ago with 516 on Bosque Brotante, and I remember going down to interviewed several people, and it was an initiative of gathering the histories and rewriting them and acknowledging and putting them forward. And there was really great moments that happened, and I think that those relationships. I think of Professor Robles and the activist work that he did down by the border when he was protesting the U.S. dumping its nuclear waste down there, and the fact that he was able to bring everybody together to shut down the border with his students. That was extraordinary. The fact that he was able to preserve the U.S. extracting historical artifacts from that area as well. That's a lot of that what we've seen in our communities here. I think that is important, and that's important to sit and to recognize. And I think it can be complicated, right? I think that there is a weight sometimes that happens when we're sitting in those spaces, and I think you have to remember to listen to maybe thoughtful, caring conversations, people that guide you, something that is more than the physical, something that is in you a little bit more, that is spiritual, that is important to hold on to.
When we're working with museums, some of which were not imagined or built to serve us, how do we as Native peoples protect ourselves from generations of harm committed by museums and fight against the censoring or mishandling and misspeaking of our visual and material culture?
I can lead with an example of an artist that's really inspired me and helped me think through this as a practice. She's an Alutiiq artist, Tanya Lucan Linklater, and Tanya is trained as a choreographer. Tanya originally comes from Kodiak Island. They were also removed by the U.S. Army, forcibly relocated. But a lot of their cultural belongings, the majority, and this is common with communities in the North, the majority of their cultural wealth and their cultural belongings are in other museums. For Tanya, particularly the Phoebe Hearst Museum. And she started doing these projects, including one that she did as part of Soundings, an exhibition in 5 parts, which is on view actually right now at Powake Pueblo and 516 Arts in Albuquerque, so it's in 2 sites. And that's an exhibition that unfolds like a score, like a music score. And Tanya's proposal for us, when we did a workshop a year in advance of the opening of the exhibition, is she said, well, I saw the Seluktuk gutskin parka on view at the Metropolitan Museum in New York City. And she said, when I saw that piece as a choreography, I saw it as a score, I saw it as part of someone's body, I saw it as a dance. And she said, why don't we extend and think of these items, our cultural belongings, our cultural inheritance, as song, as music, as ceremony? Because I think we always have, in fact, but we kind of forgot a bit with the definitions of contemporary art or the restrictions. And so what she did was, the Met wouldn't give us that one, they wouldn't lend us that one. Anyway, we tried. But we did find one, very, very similar, at the Manitoba Museum in Winnipeg, and it's likely from Tanya's community. And if you know anything about gutskin parkas, they're pretty extraordinary because they're sewn to that particular person's body with a waterproof stitch, so that when you're out whale hunting in a kayak, if your kayak tips, you're not going to die if you go in the freezing water. You're not going to die of hypothermia. So amazing technology, right? And so she went to the Manitoba Museum first to visit with the parka, to ask its permission, to see if it might want to travel. And of course, similar to most museum holdings, they knew all about the white guy who gave the parka, but they didn't even know the name of the woman who sewed it. Right? This is common. And so she asked its permission. It seemed to consent. That's what Tanya told me. And she spent 3 days with it, actually, to get to know it. And then we were able to borrow it. It traveled by land to the Agnes Etherington, which is the first venue of this exhibition. And then together with Laura Ortman and 2 dancer collaborators, Laura Ortman is a White Mountain Apache, amazing violinist, I think most people in this room know her, they did a process of 1 week of open rehearsals in relation to that item, so that it again could sing, and it again could dance. And to me, when I saw that and I witnessed that process, I thought, we need to expand what we understand as repatriation. And we need to think of what I termed repatriation otherwise. But in fact, I think it's rematriation otherwise. Because a lot of places will never give us back our things, but it doesn't mean we can't have a relationship with them.
That's lovely. I will add that I have been to many, 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 many museums in the past 3 years. And you can tell when you walk into museums with Native exhibits if Native people have been involved or not. And I can say the 2 things that happen in most exhibits that are not involving Native people, they are extremely, extremely dark. Like you're in this really bright part of the museum, and then all of a sudden you're in this really dark hallway, and you're in this dark area. And there's always, for some reason, either real or fake rocks. Always.
Those of us who've been in museums,
Right? You guys know exactly what I'm talking about. And, you know, so, and they always want to take me into their Native part of the museum, right? And it's always like, okay, here we go in the dark. There's that rock. I feel like spray painting it at some point, but no. So one of the things that
I try to ask them, you can ask the museum, what is your code of ethics for working with Native people? And if they don't have one, then you kind of say to them that's something that needs to be created if we're going to work together. And it's not just in practice and collection, but it's also in what's your code of ethics when you're looking for funding and when you're getting funding from organizations. Right, we need to be able to say that this is, we're doing it the right way, right? That everything that is moving forward in a way that is respectful of the objects and the care that needs to be brought to it. And yeah, they get really uncomfortable with me. Because the other thing I ask is, how many Native staff do you have? And it's usually, we don't have Native staff. And then there's a long, big excuse for why they don't have Native staff, right? But, it's easy to ask these questions from the get-go and get them to be thinking about it.
It rocks.
Yeah.
It's such a tough question. And I think as not a museum person, it's difficult when you can't bring objects home because you don't have the facilities to care for them forever. And then as a Native person, they were never supposed to exist that long anyways. They were supposed to be held, and they were supposed to be danced, and they were supposed to be breathed to life. So it's almost like an impossible riddle to solve. And I think that there's just like a certain sadness, like with objects that are stuck there, And I think that with artists, as we've learned, we've adapted. And it still comes to that adaptation of culture, whether it's the railroad coming through and, it changes our art forever in the Southwest. We have really crazy histories like what you're talking about too, where, I'm just finally able to get some of our baskets back. And, part of the provenance is, this was from the Amen collection. And they were selling them for bread, to survive. And it's important to bring those objects home. But I think as artists, we're not making with the same spirit that our ancestors were, because we know that we've had to adapt for, is it going to live in a museum forever? Is the material archival? Is this something that is serving community and can't be exploited by outside community? Like, we have to actively ask all of those questions before even making, knowing that we don't have sometimes we have cultural privacy around making, and those things still exist in our community. But I think what we're talking about here is not art making for cultural privacy. It's art making for cross-cultural experience, education. And so it's a very tricky question, but I think a lot of us are making with those things in mind. And that's a very different way to make.
It's interesting. I was having this conversation with Heather Autumn last night, actually at a party, and one of the things that we were talking about, how objects, the power of objects, and I was reminded about my time at the National Museum of the American Indian when I worked there for 10 years. One of the things that we used to hear about were security guards that would stay with objects in the middle of the night or what have you, and these people who were not museum professionals, but they were the security people, they were the ones who were watching them, could hear the songs inside of these vaults and could hear the sounds that people were making. And so I think in a lot of ways these objects continue to hold power, and they connect in themselves, and they sing, and they still are things that understand where they are and what they're doing, and still emit that agency, I think. And it's a really interesting kind of thing to think about what you're talking about, Cara, of what was made back then and what we know about these objects now and the power that they hold.
I agree with that a lot. I think I've been fortunate to be able to work in some of those spaces, and you do need to be thoughtful and mindful, because they do emit things. I remember sitting with multiple artifacts and objects from excavation sites, and I couldn't handle it. It was heavy. Wondered why I was even in that space and what everything in that space was even doing there and why that had taken place. It's complicated, and I think when you're entering in those spaces, you have to enter with sort of very clear boundaries of what it is that you're going to be doing, or even engaging if that's something that you're interested or going to be doing. It's something that can be heavy, but they do emit them. I remember friends talking about light radiating from this piece of that belonged to an individual that had passed away, and then that being them that was coming through, that we were seeing, that we were feeling. So it's something. It's yeah.
So I'm going to shift a little bit. I'm going to ask a little bit more in terms of what's happening right now with the rises in censorship, as we started talking about Cara, and unrest. How do we, as cultural workers, as artists, as creatives, prepare ourselves for, and how do artists prepare themselves for negative public reaction? Because this is happening too. Candice, you can start.
No, it's a very vulnerable space.
It is.
I mean, I think, for any artist that's in the audience, it's a very vulnerable space, and you go into the arts, even when you're in school, learning to take critique, right? And I think we go through life trying to get thicker skin and decide, whether our creative process is, if we're going to go through with that idea, if it's important enough to put out there and experience that vulnerability, with our own community, with outside of community. I think that most artists that have gotten to a point where they know it's also self-care, know that they have to continue and are perfectly willing to die on that proverbial hill. And I think we're not going to be censored. We're not going to make different art, and maybe people will stop buying it, or people will start putting it on display. And so I think maybe it's more of a question of support, institutional support. What are the institutions going to do? Because it's really, as independent artists, we don't censor ourselves. It's really going to be, people that are in positions of power to display and to exhibit and to support and to uphold. Are they willing to continue that fight and, fear no art?
I do think there's a natural kind of relationship too with humanities scholars and artists. Humanities scholars like to write a lot. They really like to inform you about things, educate you, sometimes not with the most open public language, right? Sometimes a little heavy and dense. But, creating these really great partnerships with artists and scholars who can write the op-ed piece, who can take the educational part of it on and say, this is why this is happening, or this is what the artist is doing, and this is why it is okay for the artist to do it. Right? The government does this all the time. Well, the Constitution says this, and so this is what's going to happen. Or the legislation says this is what's going to happen. Well, our creation stories say this, so this is how it's going to have to be. We just have to make sure that we have the right people who can tell that story and educate people in the right way.
You said what I was thinking in a much more eloquent way, Shelly. I was thinking the thing that I'm really most afraid of right now are the various kinds of censorship, including self-censorship, right? And I also understand how, for some folks, that's a kind of mode of survival. We had to do that in our own communities, too. But the thing I fear most is in a kind of climate of censorship. what happens when we can't speak openly about a genocide? What does that say about our collective humanity?
I think it's fear. Yeah, I think we have to move beyond that. I think those censorships will come. I think there's people with different values, and it's unfortunate to think, but what I remember is just to try and ground myself and to understand where it is that I'm coming from and the values that have been instilled in me, and holding very true to those as much as I can, and how it is that I'm moving forward, because those hurdles will come.
And that leads me right into the last question for you all, which is, what are the ways in which we can collectively join forces and adapt and create systems of support? A lot of you are already doing that inherently, and support an ecosystem of shifting priorities. So what are those ways?
I heard one really great example recently. I had traveled to Vermont, and I went up to what do they call it, the Northeast Kingdom of Vermont, way up in there, to visit the last Shaker village. And NEH had funded the renovation of their herb buildings, which is basically a big barn where they do all their herbs and care for them. And the funding was cut, as of about March, April. When I had gone there was a big sign in front of the herb building. It's a huge barn and it's beautiful, talking about NEH and the funding, the application, all the work that was going to be happening. And they said, we're making a new sign that says, NEH cut our funding. And this is the problem. This is what's going to happen now that the funding has been cut. And instead of saying, yay, NEH, and yay, we got all this money, they're just putting it right out there. We had this project, it was great. This is what happened, and now this is what's not going to happen. And I said, I want every single NEH grantee whose grant was terminated to please make a sign like that.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Put it on your website.
Right?
Please put it up where everybody will see it and know that this is consequences. This is what happens.
Yeah. Wow, that's awesome to hear you say that. It's really amazing.
Can I add very briefly just one example that I heard that was really inspiring from the Warhol Foundation? And I was on a panel recently in Switzerland, and Joel Wax, who's the president of the board, shared that Warhol, when NEA funding was cut for small regional museums, a lot of those grants were about $10,000, but they were a lifeline for many of those programs. Warhol Foundation pivoted, and they gave the exact amount that was cut to all of those museums, no strings attached. So we need to pivot, and we need to pivot fast.
I think that's kind of where I was going. Yes, that deserves applause. Sorry. Different ideas of wealth, ideas of reciprocity, a kindness that starts from within. How can we step in even as individuals and give back to our communities, with time, with cultural leadership. All of those things are more abundant in wealth than money. And I think we really just have to be clever and think of new systems. We have to be systems thinkers and say, while one may be severely disrupted, there are many more that have been demonstrated to us in ways that we've been able to resist and survive and be resilient. And so I think we're just really going to have to look within ourselves as individuals and be kind to one another and find ways to reciprocate.
Yeah. And I would, and I think, Candice, you said it earlier, is I think moving out of this mindset of disparity and making sure that those resources are being shared equally, I think is important, is changing how it is that we're thinking and philosophizing about everything and how it is that we're operating.
Yeah, and I have to say, I'm always going to be we stay positive. Foundations are stepping up to the plate. Mellon Foundation, Luce Foundation, MacArthur Foundation, some of these major foundations have already said, we're going to come to the table now, and we're going to try to fill in those places that are losing funding that, really need it just to survive. I was with these humanities nerds. They're seriously nerds for 3 years. They're amazing. They are nerds. As everything was kind of being dismantled, they would come into the office, and it was devastating, but they were like, we're living in a moment. It's going to be in the history books. We're going to be a part of history, like in major ways, right? So we're all living in a moment. Our artists are going to capture this history for us and tell it down the road, and we're going to reflect back on it. But we grow. We know we're Native people. We adjust. We've always been here. We're not going anywhere, and we'll figure it out. But I do think that finding ways to work together and find new friends, we have to make new friends. We can move it forward. And when things fall apart, it just means that we get to build it up, and hopefully we can build it up the way that we're supposed to.
I said this last year, and it remains the same. It's amazing to look at the power of Indigenous and Native art looking right back at you, and these voices are so incredibly strong and so incredibly important, and I think this conversation was a moment. And I just want to thank you on behalf of the Native Arts and Cultures Foundation. You all are so wonderful and so smart, and I'm so pleased that I get to live in a world with all of you. I just am so in awe of all of you, and this conversation was wonderful. And right now we're going to bring up actually my boss, who's going to pass around the mic. So if anybody has some questions that they'd like to ask these wonderful people, let's do it right now. So anybody have any questions?
I raise my hand. Okay. First one, friends. Thank you. Thank you so much for your conversation.
It works when you turn it on. Okay.
Thank you, everyone. As I was listening, I was thinking about James Luna. Again, thank you, Dr. Laura Evans. While at IAIA, it was a privilege to witness, I felt very special, his performances to the students in the auditorium. And one of there was a certain practice with take a picture with an Indian. And this sticks with me to this day, of having this intelligence of luring the viewers in. And while they're there, then they get it. And it was a response from my interpretation of the different forms of art. He said, if no shade to anyone's creative process, but if there's a loud, like, rebellious voice, or people are gonna not even want to enter that space for whatever reason. But if you can be quiet and you can lure them in, and when they're there, then they realize what the message is. So I guess my question is, in this kind of subversive strategy, is there anything that resonates from that methodology of James Luna? And I carry that into a lot of my practice today. And also the transparency that Candice Hopkins also mentions is transparency of just being honest with all the participants. But that is my question.
Thank you.
I would say that one thing that I really learned from James is the power of humor to bring people in, because they don't always see the barbs that are in that humor before they participate. And I'd say that Take a Picture with a Real Indian was a really good example of that, but so was Artifact Piece, right? Because Artifact Piece, one thing he shared with me, it was when that was first performed at the San Diego Museum of Man, and where he famously put himself in a case as a form of culturally specific institutional critique. When people went to look up at the labels, they learned that he got that scar on his knee because he fell after a bar fight because he was drunk. And they learned that his favorite album was Sex Pistols, Nevermind the Bullocks, and a couple of others. I don't remember what they were now. And then they learned, all these really personal but funny details about his life. And the thing that he shared with me that I thought was so profound was he said, when people saw that performance, and he said it was, of course, durational because he was on view the hours that the museum was open, that he had to teach himself how to breathe imperceptibly so that people thought he was not living. But he said the audiences who came to look at him weren't shocked to see a Native person on display. To them, that was fine. They were only shocked when they discovered that he was alive. So there's a strategy in there, and I think that there's always strategies with artists, and that is we do need to invite people in, because if we don't invite them in, and whether that's through humor or generosity or the depth of relation, we're not going to come to any kind of forms of understanding, right? So I would say that that's what I learned from him.
And don't forget about food.
Yes.
Burritos.
To our panelists, Candice Hopkins, Dr. Shelly Lowe, Cara Romero, Daisy Cadeza Ureña. Thank you for your honesty and your brilliance. Please give it up for our panelists today.
Yay, thank you.